All right, guys, welcome back. We are back with a very, very special guest, someone very special to me. I think you can call him an idol of mine growing up. Woody Woodburn, former columnist of the sports columnist of the Ventura County Star, current general columnist for the Star, and author of a brand new memoir related to you guys, UCLA folks, Wooden and Me, a memoir on Woody's relationship with Coach Wooden. And he is joining us today to chat about Coach Wooden, to chat about his career. Woody, what's going on, bud?
Hey, so great to be with you, John, and what a nice intro. Thanks a lot.
I mean, you really are one of my idols. You, Jim Murray, that's pretty much my Mount Rushmore right there.
My Mount Rushmore was Jim Murray and John Wooden, so for you to say that about me just feels wonderful. That's
pretty close then. I think we're working on the same wavelength here. Woody, let's just get right into this. Wooden and Me, your memoir on a very special man, obviously, a very special coach, but to you, he was a little more than a coach. So why don't you talk about how your relationship with him began?
Sure. Well, I was just a young reporter, when you broke in at like 27 years old, and I covered him giving a talk up in Santa Maria when I was working up there. And then, he gave a great talk. I go up to him afterwards, and I get a few minutes one-on-one for an interview, and then I say, I was at your basketball camp when I was 15 years old, like 15 years ago. And Coach Wooden's so classy, he goes, "Oh, well, yes, I remember you." Of course he didn't, but he's just so classy, So I sent him my column after I wrote it, and he writes back this beautiful thank you note and invites me to join him for a walk. And I'm living in Santa Maria, it's, a 3-hour drive. But that weekend, I called him up, and I was there the next, that Saturday morning at 7 o'clock to go for a walk with him.
Yeah.
So we walked 4.5 miles, and the first 3 miles were, I'm just riddling with basketball questions, and he's just so gracious answering them. But like the last mile or so, and then we had breakfast, it just turned to he's asking me about my family, and my wife was pregnant, and his wife had just died like 2 years before that, so he's just kind of coming out of his shell. So I think the timing when I met him was good, and we just hit it off, and so I joined him for a couple more walks, and we had letters and phone calls, and he just kind of became a friend and mentor to me, really. It's almost like I was a former player. And that's what's kind of special about my memoir, I think, is that people think that you have to have played for him to be your teacher or your coach.
Yeah.
But no, he was just a teacher in real life, And so many books have been written by players about him. And here I'm someone who wasn't a player, and I think that just the general person can feel like they knew Coach Wooden through me now by reading this book.
Absolutely. And I'll never forget when he passed away, I spoke to some of his former players, and, so much of it was, let me rephrase that, none of it was about basketball. So much of it was about life. And, the impact that Coach Wooden had on them, forget on the court, but, dealing with their wives, dealing with their girlfriends. Should I propose to my wife or not? And
exactly.
Those are the kind of questions that, you hear, him talk about X's and O's, and you hear him talk about Lou Alcindor and Bill Walton and these guys, and you kind of forget that he was a mentor. And the one point that I wanted to bring up is I saw someone in a book review for your new memoir mention that this was like a Tuesdays with Morrie. And, that's one of my favorite books. Mitch Albom's, obviously, that's his great book on his former teacher. What kind of talk about some of the lessons that you just learned with Coach Wooden that you share in the book?
And I love the analogy comparing to that, except what I really like about mine is this was a 2-decade relationship with him, and it's not a sad, Tuesdays with Morrie is kind of sad, and it's like over a few months where he's just getting sicker and sicker.
Yeah.
And this is one just our relationship grew. So my first child was born, within 6 months after we met, and so he became, every time I would call him, the first question would be like, how are the little ones? He always called them little ones, even when they got into college. How are the little ones? And that's what he wanted to talk about first before anything else, and he'd talk about his great-grandchildren. And my daughter was actually born just like 6 months after his first great-grandchild was, so I think that was another bond we had, But just, you talk about life lessons. When I got an opportunity to work for the Daily Breeze instead of Ventura Star about around 2001, it was a big thing. My kids were in their school, and they had their friends, and so I was like, I don't want to move my family down to the South Bay, but I really want this job because I'll be covering more LA stuff, big-time stuff. So I asked Coach, and he goes, well, how much more? It's going to be a long commute, but when you're commuting after work and you're coming home at midnight, your kids are asleep already anyway, so you're not losing less time with them there. you're going to have less desk work, less office hours than I was having in Ventura. So he made me see it in a new way. And so, like, I was actually going to have more time with my kids by taking this new job, even though I'd be driving more. So he just had this wisdom that he would see the big picture. Yeah.
Now, Woody, you've been a columnist you were the columnist of note for my childhood, and obviously you've been around luminaries before, and I'm sure you dealt with Tommy Lasorda and Magic Johnson, and all these greats around Los Angeles. What was it about Wooden that made him so approachable for you? Because that would be a little daunting in my mind, starting that kind of relationship with a legend like that.
Sure, and there again, it's like because he made me feel so easy when I went up to do that interview, and then he sends me a letter with his phone number, and he invites me to go for a walk with him, so he made it easy to be his friend. Or like another life lesson, I remember, I think it was just the second time I was visiting him, and the phone rings, and we're in the middle of our conversation, and the answer machine picks up, and it's Bill Walton. So I'm like, Coach, you better pick that up, and he goes, oh, no. If I pick that up, Bill will talk my ear off for an hour, and you and I won't get to visit. I'll call him back later.
Oh.
But it's such a thing. Like, when he's with you, you have his attention. And I think of that so often when you're in a restaurant or somewhere, and someone you're with, and they go, oh, I have to take this message on the phone, or the cell phone, right?
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, you don't have to take that. You can take it later. It's just like, be present with who you're with. And it was just, that just meant the world to me when he said that.
Yeah. So now here we are. Obviously, your relationship has grown and grown and grown. Talk about kind of the latter stage of his life and what it was like to be, I don't know, maybe I guess the way to call it is kind of like in the audience of greatness, because I know towards the end of his life, he was just doling out, pearls of wisdom to anyone who listened.
Exactly. And it's kind of interesting, too, like, as our relationship grew, I never wanted to overstep my bounds, or whatever. So I try not to call him too frequently. I try to sometimes have an excuse for not calling, but I'd call if I had a question just in my life, or I didn't want to overdo the visits. And as he got older, we cut the walks down to about 3.5 miles. He used to walk 5 miles, and then when he had his second hip replacement, he couldn't walk anymore. So I visited him less and less, and he was getting more and more busy because he became this elder statesman that everybody was kind of rediscovered a second time,
Yeah.
Because when he first left coaching, he was kind of forgotten. And then he just became more and more popular. So I didn't want to overstep my bounds. So we just had more of a relationship with a few visits and just the phone calls and letters. And then he became even closer just to my kids. Like, he would send them letters. I remember one time before the school year started, he sent them a letter and he said, now study hard in school, but make sure you make time for fun too. And that's just total, because he said the two most important words in language are love and balance.
Yeah.
And that was their balance right there, right? You've got to study, but have fun, So he was just so wise, like you said.
I think one of the things that you touched on earlier that's really just so fascinating to me is, there are basketball players who for 50 years have called him coach. And, there was a time when baseball players at UCLA and before called him coach, but there was a legion out there of people who he touched who never actually played for him. Talk about what you've learned, I guess, about sports through him as well, because he never actually coached you, and yet you were a sports writer. So I know you have such a deep connection there.
Yeah, just, his pearls of nugget, be quick, don't hurry. That applies so much to sports, right? If you go too quick, you're going to make a mistake. But it's also in the press box. If you got a deadline, you've got to type quick. But if you hurry, you're going to send in a copy that's not clean.
Yeah.
Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Well, if you don't do your prep work before you get to the game, half of the writing is knowing your stats and who you're going to interview and what the win streaks are. You have to be prepared if you're going to write a quick column on deadline. And I know it's the same in the business with you when you're doing your radio show.
Yeah. And so now here we are. And obviously, this is just now coming to fruition, this memoir, Wooden and Me. Talk about your Kickstarter campaign, because that's really what's getting going here. And this just started a couple days ago, and I know the ball's already rolling.
Yeah, I'd love people to go to Kickstarter.com, and then you could just type in Jon Wooden, and my page will come up. And I also want to challenge the Bruin Nation, because this book's been a couple years in the making, and when I first approached some New York publishing houses, they're like, oh, we love your writing, we love the book, but nobody cares about Jon Wooden anymore. And it just floored me. It's that
Really?
East Coast bias that we all know in the Heisman voting and the poll voting, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want the Bruin Nation not just to support me, but support Coach Wooden. We're going to send a message back east that, like, hey, everybody does care about Coach Wooden. Everybody can still learn from Coach Wooden and be inspired by him. And he's changed my life. He's changed my kids' lives.
Yeah.
And like you said, so many people, after he passed away, so many people came up to me who had like a letter or something signed by him that they met him. You've seen him at the basketball games. I mean, he'd be watching the game and there'd be lines, and he never turned anybody away for an autograph, you know?
Yeah. And so now, the Kickstarter campaign just got started. Talk about a couple of the different levels, because I know you're offering some prizes back, and there's some really cool stuff going on here.
Yeah, we have an ebook and a hard copy book, a soft paperback book.
Yep.
And for $25 pledge, you can buy one paperback book, and it's going to be autographed when it comes out later this summer. But one of the levels I really like is I call it the Make Friendship a Fine Art level, because that's one of his favorite phrases. Mm-hmm. And you buy 2 books and you get a discount, and the idea is buy one and give it to someone else. And I remember one time when one of his books came out, 4 years after I'd met him, I'm getting ready to leave, and he just says, wait a second. He walks into his study, comes out, and gives me a book that just came out. And I go, Coach, no, I'll buy that at the store. You can't give that to me. And he just kind of sheepishly smiles and goes, oh, well, I got to give it to you now because I already signed it to you. And I go, Coach, that's too nice. He goes, I'll tell you what, why don't you go buy a book at the store and you just give it to someone else? And so, there again, total classy Wooden. But
yeah.
So I know he'd love this book, and I know he'd really like that Make Friendship an Art level, because he'd want people to buy one for yourself and buy one for a library, buy one for your kid's school, just reach out and help other people.
What's coming up pretty soon is Father's Day, and I can't think of a better present. This is right up that alley, huh? You're a father.
Would be great. You won't have it in time to deliver to Father's Day, but you give your dad a note and say, this is coming in September, Dad, and it's worth waiting for. And, in fact, buy one for your kid for graduation. Well,
last thing I want to kind of touch on is what you put into this book. Now, obviously, you're a general columnist now for the Ventura County Star. You've been putting time into this book. Talk a little bit about just what it was like to actually put these words, into action. It's one thing to have them in your mind. It's another thing to have those stories that, you've always kind of had, but to really, put them on paper and reflect on them. What's that like, and what's that process been like?
Yeah, it's really a nice feeling just to I relive the memories often anyway. Our house is almost like a shrine. We got pyramids everywhere and basketballs and things. And like when the kids are growing up, I'd put the Woodenisms in their lunchbox, on their napkins, make today your masterpiece, that kind of thing. So we're just a Wooden family, but to sit down and really contemplate putting these things down, like there's a lot of things I hadn't realized. Like I met him in 87 when he was 76 years old, and that's how old my grandfather was when he died, and I was only 6, so I didn't really remember my grandfather. So it's almost a continuation of this grandfatherly figure.
Yeah.
My daughter's due date was actually August 8th, and I remember telling him that on our first walk. That was his anniversary with Nell. Wow. And my daughter was actually born 3 months early, but it's just these little coincidences that I had never realized. And just the more I wrote this, I'm just going, wow, these lives are intertwined. Or when my mom passed away, 1990, so I'd only known him for 3 years, Coach Wooden wrote my dad a letter and sent all these poems and things that had helped him when his wife died.
Wow.
That just meant the world to my dad, because they were married for 45 years too.
Imagine
so it was
that.
like, who does that kind of thing? So his example, some people walk the walk, but he just went beyond walking the walk. He was amazing.
Well, I'm beyond the fact that this is Coach Wooden, and who's someone obviously that we all follow, and as a UCLA writer and now doing the podcast, who's someone that I'm obviously familiar with. But I want to read the book just because you're a great writer, and I cannot wait.
Thanks so much.
And the stories will jump off the page, and that's what I'm really excited about, because this is not a sports book. This is a human book, and that's
exactly. It's a happy Tuesdays with more. It really is, and I'm no Mitch Albom, but I'll tell you what, nobody's a John Wooden, so I'll take John Wooden over anybody being in the book, and so anybody could write it.
Well, that's great stuff, guys. UCLA fans, come out in full force. Wooden and Me, the memoir. Check out the Kickstarter fund. Woody, what's your Twitter as well?
Just at Woody Woodburn.
There we go, at Woody Woodburn. I will obviously be sharing this as well, and check out the Facebook page and my Twitter as well as the Bro Twitter, and you can check this out, guys. Woody, thanks so much for jumping on. This has been fantastic.
Thanks so much, John, for making the time for me.
Great stuff.